Hey, Chris.
How you doing?
How are you?
Good, good.
Good evening.
Hey, Ken.
So ready for a little golf?
Yeah. I don't know if it's politically correct to still call it a rickshaw.
I wouldn't.
I don't think I will.
Hey everyone,
Hi, Lucas.
Hi, Lukash.
how is everyone doing?
Good.
Yeah, we're doing okay. Still here.
I think I'll see somebody that I recognize the name.
Randy, I have a question. Where do you upload the videos?
Sorry, where?
Mm-hmm.
There's
where or when?
Where? What website?
The center website. Go to the main menu and there's a videos button. We still haven't put up the potpourri yet from last time. We got to do that. We'll do that with this one.
I see.
But there are previous meetings there.
We have about 6 or 7 up there now, Lukash. Our center website has a link to the YouTube page that has all of the meetings.
Can you send me the link, please?
It's our website?
And the YouTube channel.
No. You can go through. I'll show you on the website.
Okay, appreciate it.
Mr. Hamilton, hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Chris, you had about 80 participants, didn't you?
I guess so. Something like that. I didn't see that.
Randy, I love that picture you have on the wall of the lunar module. It's beautiful.
Ah, yeah, that's an original.
That is, oh, man. I tell you,
Yeah,
that's great.
look up Paul Field on Google, FJE.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. He owes me more paintings, actually.
Lukash, I've sent you the link to the center website in the chat window. Do you see the chat window?
Yep, I have it.
Okay, good. And there's a video button. It's about in the center of the page, off to the right-hand side.
Alrighty, thanks.
You're welcome. We got 50 people on.
Pretty good.
Randy?
Okay, shall we start?
Yeah, I'd ask that everyone mute, other than Randy.
Okay, I want to point out one of our attendees tonight is Chris Gaynor, who gave there he is, Chris, our past president of the RASC, and he just, his new book came out, History of the Hubble Telescope, and so you can go online and download that. And I always forget the name of it, Chris. It's got an interesting name.
Not yet imagined.
Not yet imagined. That's it. Okay.
Yeah, if you just Google like Hubble not yet imagined, it'll take you to the NASA page, and you can download the file in PDF or EPUB or a Kindle version. I just found out today, by the way, that Amazon is selling the Kindle version on their website, but you can get it for free from NASA. So,
yeah, wait till the print comes out, huh?
that's right. It's not out yet, but I'll announce it when it is out.
Okay, great. All right, well, good to see everyone. A good turnout tonight. Hope everyone's well. For those of you who are new to the center, my name is Randy Attwood. I'm currently the president of the center, and I thought I would continue a series of talks that will probably continue for the next couple of years, commemorating the 50th anniversary of moon flights. I think I did give presentations at center meetings on Apollo 11, 12, and 13. So this is the next one in the list, Apollo 14. It will be recorded and it will be online. And if you don't want your video to appear, then please turn your video off. And also please turn your mute off during the talk. But definitely you can submit questions to the chat during the talk, and then we can go back through them afterwards, and I'd be glad to answer them. There will be some announcements after the talk, but primarily we'll want to preview our February meetings. February 12th will be our potpourri meeting, and February 26th will be our annual general meeting of the center. But I'll remind everyone about that a little later on. So I think I will share my screen here. And how does that look? We all set to go? Okay. So I'm going to talk about Apollo 14, which was the third successful lunar landing, and look at the crew, look at the plans for the mission, and really just detail some of the highlights of the mission, and pointing out that even though, you know, after Apollo 13 failed, there was a lot of pressure on NASA and the Apollo 14 crew to be successful. But there were, in fact, 3 problems that took place during the mission, and any one of those problems could have prevented a successful landing. So we'll look at that. So there's the crew. The commander in the middle is Alan Shepard, and he and Edgar Mitchell, the fellow on the right, went down to the lunar surface, and Stu Rusa on the left was the command module pilot. Al Shepard was pretty famous because he was one of the Mercury 7 and also was the first American to fly into space. He had actually only flown one mission, a 15-minute up and down mission that was just got him high enough to get into space, but he didn't go into orbit. But he had a problem with his ears, which grounded him. And essentially for 10 years, or I guess it was 8 years, around the time of Apollo 11, he had an operation on his ears to put him back onto flight status. And with his pull, he wanted to go right on the mission that was right after Apollo 11, or after Apollo 12, and get a crew and just fly as soon as possible. But the NASA management said, no, we'll put you on Apollo 14. So instead of getting the mission Apollo 13, which would have been bad for Alan Shepard, he and his crew flew on Apollo 14. Here's their patch, not a very busy patch, and it shows the little pin that astronauts wear to show that they're astronauts. When they become an astronaut, they get a silver one, and when they fly, they get a gold one. So it shows that pin taking the 3 astronauts to the moon. So the problem with Apollo 13 was an oxygen tank in their service module exploded, knocking out their power supply, and essentially all they could do was use the life support system in the lunar module to get them home. So after Apollo 13, after the crew made their way home, NASA got busy redesigning the hardware and repositioning oxygen tanks and adding batteries and essentially just doing everything they could based on what they learned from Apollo 13 to prevent the mission problem from happening again. So here is the crew on a lunar module trainer that they had at the Kennedy Space Center for practices. And the one thing that the crew gets to do is it gets to name their spacecraft. And on this mission, they named the command service module Kitty Hawk, I guess after the Wright brothers, and the lunar module after Antares, the red star in Scorpio. And they named it Antares because there's a telescope in the lunar module that they use for sighting stars and essentially feeding the positions of the stars to their computer. And Antares was a star that they used a lot for navigation purposes. I met Mitchell back in the 80s when I had a cable television program. And so here's a little bit of an interview I had with Mitchell back, I think it was 83 or 84, I'm not sure.
Dr. Mitchell, what was the main objective for Apollo 14, and why was Cone Crater, the area, so important?
Well, the area around Cone Crater represented a drill, as it were, into the primordial lunar crust. And by the techniques of sampling around the crater, we could sample rocks that originally had been deep in the crust of the moon. And that's the standard sampling technique, geological sampling technique. And as a result, we were able to get data that because of the crater, science really had for inside the surface.
Were we able to get that sample? Yes, we were. And how old were they?
Well, we've had some very old materials in excess of 4.6 billion years old that came out of the moon.
Was there any apprehension for NASA or the crew of Apollo 14 following the failure of Apollo 13?
You know, I think more of a sigh of relief when we found that problem. So we now got that out of the way. Let's go on the rest of it.
Well, Apollo 14 had several small nagging problems on the way to the moon, the docking problem, the batteries. Was this a feeling that did the crew feel that hey, something's gone wrong, or is there something related?
It was part of the curve of failures. You know, every mission has failures, and the program improved as time went on as we perfected the spacecraft. So the numbers of failures was dropping dramatically with each mission. We felt lucky that they had no more than we really did.
Well, as you walked down the ladder and got out of the wind surface, set up the flag, what was your feeling? Was it mere, I'm doing a job, or excited, or was it very patriotic?
Well, all of the above. You're busy doing a job. You rehearse that job. You got to get on with it. There's the obvious exhilaration of being explored for humans to have been before. And certainly there's the patriotic national feeling that's somewhat overridden by you're representing the world. You're here on a world mission. So all of the above benefited this big film.
Al Shepard hit both her golf balls on the moon. Was your idea to throw the javelin?
Yeah, I was laughing at him. Laughing at him and picked up the javelin just to show up and outthrow it. The javelin.
Did you outthrow it?
Yes. The pressure to it was so cumbersome that they get a good hit on the golf ball.
One of the best films that I've seen from the mission is you and Al hesitating about shaving landing on the way back. You were the most hesitant. Whose idea was that?
Well, I was in the process of deciding to go here and bring it back. So I shake a little bit going out, but I didn't shake it all coming back.
Well, what do you feel was the highlight of the trip? And well, do you think was it a real disappointment that Cone Crater you never reached Cone Crater?
Well, that really isn't true. In retrospect, the film showed we were standing within 50 feet of the rim of Cone Crater.
Would you believe that?
And, yeah, we believed it. When we saw the, I believe it, particularly the thought we were up there. The film showed that we were just right on the edge, and then we walked another 50 feet over, we could have seen it. But that attests to the undulations of the surface, in which it was almost impossible to pinpoint your location precisely. And the edge of Cone Crater was very precipitous, so that we would not have been able to see it unless we were standing right on its edge. But to all intents and purposes, except for the personal feeling of looking down, we accomplished everything we set out to.
Captain Mitchell, what was the highlight of your trip on Apollo 14?
Oh, it's hard to pick up an incident. Clearly, the lunar landing and the time on the lunar surface is a highlight, but also the technological and piloting achievements. So getting there, landing, getting off successfully are all vital portions of that mission.
You said that looking back to the Earth from several 100,000 kilometers gave you an expansion of awareness. What does that mean?
Well, I guess the best way to describe it, we've all had our mountaintop experiences, our aha experiences, our peak experiences. Many have had religious experiences. All of the above apply. It's that sense of seeing something new in a different way, getting out of the trees and looking at the forest, seeing the same old data again, but suddenly it takes on new meaning. And that's really what we're talking about.
How do you feel this whole experience affected you psychologically?
Well, with a very profound appreciation for the magnificence, the harmony, the beauty, the unfolding evolution of the universe. It's a magnificent creation. It convinced me that intelligence is really the keystone to the universe, not the electron. That matter, mind, purpose, and intelligence are all inwoven in the very fabric of the way the universe is put together.
What do you feel mankind should do before we make our next trip back to the moon?
The reason for going, first of all, we will find the rationale, we will find the science, we will find the discoveries sometime in the next few years that would say, aha, if we go do this, it will be a great benefit. Just like it was 30 years after the first discoveries and explorations of Antarctica that we started putting weather stations in. A similar sort of thing is likely to happen on the moon. We will find an economic or scientific or humanitarian reason to build a station.
Interesting guy. He did, in fact, perform some ESP experiments on the way home. And I'm not sure how successful they were, but he's written a couple books. I don't have them, actually, but for some reason I haven't read them. But interesting fellow, one of the more deep thinkers of the 12 moonwalkers. So the mission was to land the same spot where Apollo 13 was to land, which was just to the east of the Ocean of Storms. And Mitchell mentioned Cone Crater. The idea was that the large impacts in, say, Mare Imbrium had sent out very old material from deep in the lunar, under the lunar surface, and created other craters, secondary craters like Cone. And so the idea was if they could sample rocks near Cone Crater, then they would be essentially sampling some of the oldest rocks on the moon. So the plan was to spend just over 2 days on the moon and take two lunar walks. And on this mission, they were going to take a little cart with them. They called it the MET, Modular, I lost the excursion transport or something like that. Anyway, we'll call it the MET. And it was designed to carry tools and a 60mm camera on the top, and bags for them to put their lunar samples. So they would take it to places like Hawaii, where there's a lot of volcanism, very moon-like surface, to practice their geology, and then they would practice in their full lunar suits and become familiar with using the MET. And then they would go on the 16G training aircraft, which would simulate the less gravity on the moon, and be familiar with how the MET would work. Here is Shepard working at another part of the LEM. They call this the Mesa, which essentially is just a big trap door that opens up. And as the first astronaut comes out and on the porch, you see a little ring there, a little handle just below the porch by the top of the ladder. He pulls that, and this whole structure just falls down on a big hinge from the side of the lunar module. And it has the TV camera, it has tools, it has lunar sample containers, and it also has the MET. And a little later on, I'll show you a picture which is kind of interesting about where the position of the MET was in the Mesa. So it's a lot of acronyms today. Here's the backup crew for Apollo 14. Each crew had a backup crew, and normally the backup crew skipped a couple missions and became the prime crew. So the Gene Cernan in the middle, and Ron Evans on the right, and Joe Engel on the left, who was an X-15 pilot. And this crew should have been the prime crew for Apollo 17. But around this time, the Vietnam War and budgets and everything, they canceled Apollos 18, 19, and 20. And so Apollo 17 was to be the last mission to the moon. And there was an outcry from the science community that they'd hired these science astronauts, and they had a geologist in astronaut Harrison Schmitt, who was a backup, already backing up Apollo 15. He would have flown on Apollo 18, but since there was no Apollo 18, there was this outcry that Schmitt should fly on Apollo 17, and he did. So Joe Engel actually lost his flight to the moon because they sent a geologist. So the LEMs were given numbers. The first LEM was called LEM 1, and it was unmanned. It flew in orbit in January 1968. LEM 2 was also to be a backup for LEM 1 to fly unmanned. It did not fly, so it's on display at the Air and Space Museum in Washington. LEM 3 was Apollo 9, LEM 4 was 10, LEM 5 was 11, etc. So with LEM 6 was 12, 7 was 13, Apollo 14 got LEM 8. And this is it being processed at the Grumman Aerospace Factory in Long Island. And once it got down to Florida, it got into the various steps to get a lunar module ready to be put on the rocket and go into space. And this is a picture of LEM 8 on the right. And the plan was for LEM 9 to fly with the Apollo 15 crew, and they would have flown a 2-day, they would have been on the moon for 2 days as well. But when Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were canceled, essentially the last 3 Apollos, 15, 16, 17, they were to use a new version of the LEM, that what they call the J version, which had more the capability of supporting the crew for 3 days instead of 2, and it was big enough to carry the car, the lunar rover, and it was just overall a different LEM. So as a result, we have LEM 8 for Apollo 14 on the right and LEM 10 for Apollo 15 on the left. And that left LEM 9 in a position where it was donated to the Smithsonian. So the 2 lunar modules that you see on display, one at the Air and Space Museum and one down in Florida, that is LEM 2 and LEM 9. And this is a picture of LEM 9 on display at the Kennedy Space Center with a lunar rover that it would not have taken, but you can see the mesas open there, and not the greatest display, but it sat there for years getting dusty. And I went down to Florida to see a shuttle mission in the 90s, just around the time that they were going to move LEM 9 to a new display building, which is over by the shuttle runway. And if you've ever been there, they took this big Saturn V rocket that they had it outside, they put it inside, and they have all these, the theater and all these things. So LEM 9 was moved, and just around the time that I was there, they were all set to move it. So I asked the Kennedy Space Center people if I could get a nice close look at it. And I wanted to get some photos and things like that. And the fellow who was there said, well, how would you like to go inside? And I went, well, are you kidding me? And so here was a LEM that should have flown to the moon, but instead here I am going inside to the LEM, and spent about 20 minutes inside LEM 9. So you can see all the controls there. Everything was ready to go. It had the grid on the commander's window that he would use during landing. The only thing that was missing on the bottom right there, where you see that little hole, that's where the computer would have been. I think the computer probably flew on another mission. So this was of course a big highlight to be inside a LEM. Oh, you can see the telescope at the top that's used for sighting stars, and then you'd find the star and then tell the computer what star you were looking at. So at this time, oh, this is another picture inside. This is sitting on the Ascent engine cover, and there's not a lot of room in these spacecraft. You can imagine two big guys with two Apollo spacesuits and a backpack in there moving around. And here I've got my right foot sort of holding the hatch open and looking out onto the porch there and down towards the lunar surface. It was crowded in there with me just sitting there, let alone two astronauts ready to go out on the moon. But that was certainly a highlight. I was down there, I was doing some research, and I spent some time with this fellow. His name is George Skurla, and he worked for Grumman. He ended up being president of Grumman after Apollo. But during Apollo, he moved his family down to Florida, and he was in charge of processing the lunar modules once they were flown down from Long Island to Kennedy. So he had 1,600 people working for him. From about 1965 through 1972. And he was a really great guy. Really, he would talk to me for hours about all the experiences. And here's what the Apollo 13 crew gave him after their mission. They gave him a little plaque of thanks to all the Grumman people down in Florida. And the crew pulled out as much as they could out of the lunar module before they closed the hatch. And so there's some bits and pieces of LEM 7 that is on George's wall. Well, I had told George I was going to go up and see LEM 9, asked him if he wanted to come along. And he did. He met me up there. And then when we got there, he said, well, I'd like to get on the ladder too. Now, George was about 80 years old at this point, and had a kind of a bad back. But I thought it was so cool to see George Stewart. We found a ladder for him. This is the security guy that let me in there. And we got George Skurla, the head of Grumman's KSC team, to actually get up on the ladder for a few minutes, off that ladder and onto the LEM ladder. But it's meant to hold an astronaut with several hundred pounds on the lunar surface, which is 1/6 gravity. It would hold you, but I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time on it, to be quite honest. But once he got down, we were sort of putting the ladder away, and then George started looking at the mesa. And this is a U.S. national piece of government historical, and he starts tearing apart the mesa, taking the kapton off and just doing what the astronauts would have done after they landed on the moon and took off this thermal protection stuff to get to all the tools and everything. But it was all held together by Velcro, so we could put it all back together. But you'll notice that sign there on the side of the mesa. It says MET removal sequence, and there are instructions for removing a MET. So this LEM was essentially identical to LEM 8, which was on Apollo 14. So this is where LEM 9 ended up for many years, right beside the big Saturn V and the big Apollo building. And if you've been down there and gone on a tour, then you've walked underneath LEM 9. Not a very nice place for it. I'd rather like to see it on the ground. And in fact, last year they lowered it, and they since then, I believe they've put together a new display. Hopefully it's better than the old one that they had in the other building. But you can see LEM 9 there when you go down to Florida. So in the fall of 1970, the spacecraft, the Saturn V with Kitty Hawk and Antares, was moved out to the launch pad. My first trip down to Florida was in around Christmas 1970, and of course, I made it clear that to my family that we were going to go to the Space Center. And what a great treat to see Apollo 14 sitting on the launch pad, just less than or about a month away from launch. So the mission started on January 31st, 1971. There was some bad weather, and it kind of delayed the launch by about 40 minutes. But I wish I'd taken this picture, but I didn't. But this is the view from the press site of the launch, and it disappeared in the clouds pretty quickly. What was interesting is there was an aircraft nearby, and it captured the spacecraft, the vehicle coming out of the clouds. And in this upcoming video of the launch, you're going to see it go through the clouds and then suddenly appear above the clouds. And also right just before launch, you'll see them pull something off the nose of the Saturn V rocket. That's called the cue ball, and that protects the nose of the tower there. And they get air readings for velocity and pressure and things like that. So it looks kind of bizarre them pulling this thing off right at the last. So here's the launch of Apollo 14.
13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff with Apollo 14. 3 minutes past the hour. The tower is clear. Houston and control. Shepard reports roll program completed. Cabin pressure coming down, adjusting from sea level to a space environment. Status check in mission control, coming up all greens on the flight director's console. In Houston, everything looks good here on the ground. 1 minute 19 seconds coming up on period of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle.
That camera you see is further downrange. It's down in the Florida coast here, and apparently they've got a clear shot. This is the Vero Beach camera down there. This is 6 days. It's on 60 miles down.
1 minute 35 seconds, 9 nautical miles in altitude, 5 nautical miles downrange. Velocity now reading 3,340 feet per second.
They've been through the first real test at maximum dynamic pressure area. They came at 1 minute 25 seconds into the flight. That's where they get the maximum velocity.
Pass through Max Q. Out 1 Charlie. 1 Charlie now. We're 1 Charlie. EDSO's off.
Yeah, you're seeing the
2 minutes 5 seconds are coming up on center engine shutdown. 2 minutes 12 seconds, 20 nautical miles.
So a good launch. After they reach orbit, then after about an orbit and a half, they refire their engine to get them on the way to the moon. And not long after that, the command module separates from the third stage, turns around, and docks with Kitty Hawk. And it's quite a process. The docking system is rather complicated because you need a way to connect the two spacecraft together, but then you need a way to go through the tunnel from one spacecraft to another. So what they do is they use this docking probe assembly, which essentially has 3 little capture latches in the nose, and that connects into a drogue assembly on the lunar module. And then the whole probe assembly retracts. So it's in an extended mode, then it retracts and pulls the lunar module to connect with the command module in a airtight seal. And that is, there are 12 latches around the circumference that make the seal. So here's a close-up of the probe in an extended position. And you'll see that there are marks on the drogue they've been testing this, and essentially you can come into the, for a docking on an angle, and if you're not perfect, then the metal drogue will essentially guide the capture latches into that little hole at the end, and then the capture latches sort of connect with that end point, and it makes a stable enough grapple that the retraction of the docking probe will pull the two together. So there's another diagram of the extended probe and the retracted probe, and a few more diagrams of it. It's kind of a complicated thing. It's one of the more complicated things, systems in Apollo. There you can see on the bottom left, you can see the 2 of the 3 capture latches on the probe. And they actually take the 2 spacecraft in Florida and position them so they test this out, just to make sure that everything's going well. Well, the problem was that the capture latches would not work on Apollo 14. They went in and went to capture, and it just bounced right off. And they did that several times, and they actually pulled back away, and the people on the mission control, they scratched their heads and didn't really know what to do. And they were in a position for quite a while where they tried it and they couldn't make it work. And essentially, without docking to the lunar module, the mission was over. I mean, they're on their way to the moon, so there was a way they could turn around and come home. But they finally came up with an idea where they would go in and try to capture. And even if it didn't capture, they would fire their rockets to continually push the command module against the lunar module, and then manually retract the probe such that hopefully that some of the capture latches would connect, and then they could manually close them themselves. But for a while there, it looked pretty grim because they'd never had a problem with the system before. So that's the view they had of the lunar module Antares sitting in the 3rd stage, and then they moved in and tried to dock. So here's some video of that.
Okay, Houston, we backed out a little bit, and that last time Houston did it pretty good, and we're just not getting the capture latches in there.
Sure, we suggest you verify if you haven't already the docking probe circuit breakers on panel 8.
That's verified.
And step by 1. And 2, we suggest you go to extend on the docking probe, extend retract switch, and check the talkback screen.
Okay, we did that when we extended. We'll sure do it again.
And then back to retract.
Okay, we get both ready in the extend position.
So all the troubleshooting, essentially, it's what the ground mission control was asking them is, you know, are all the circuit breakers in? Does everything look good? They asked them to extend and retract the probe just to make sure that it was working properly. So at this point, they didn't have a clue what to do. So here they are in this next little video clip. They're going to go move in. They're going to keep firing the rockets, and they're going to manually just retract the probe without capturing and see if it works.
We got some Houston. I believe you're on a hard job, Houston. Copy square. The notice no response for approximately 3 seconds after initiating trying to retract one. We then got barber pole on both, went gray on both at the hard dock. Roger, Al, that's great. Super job, Stu. Thank you. That's a deep wiggle with the right leg. Okay, so we see with the checkbook.
So they never really did find out what was wrong with the docking probe. They had to dock again in lunar orbit after the astronauts came up from the moon, and that worked perfectly, no problem. They brought the probe back, which they normally don't do, and tests on the ground, it seemed to work fine. So probably there was some sort of debris or ice or something in it. Anyway, so they headed to the moon. One thing that all the missions, Apollo 13 and afterwards, they sent their third stage to hit the moon, and that got the seismometers that they'd set up all excited, but also left a crater that the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has photographed here. So the astronauts, the two astronauts, Shepard and Mitchell, got into the lunar module, separated, and they were going to go and land. And during this period of time, something came up on their computer, and it had to do with the computer program, and especially or specifically with the abort program. And here's this is actually the trainer that all of the astronauts use to train down in Kennedy Space Center. That's why it's so warm. But you see two buttons there. One is abort, and the other one is partially covered by a protective little door there called abort stage. And so when they're coming down to land, and for some reason it looks like, you know, for whatever reason they have to call off the landing, then they will hit the abort button, and that will automatically tell the computer to take them back into lunar orbit, and that would be it, no landing. But it all depends on whether the descent engine that they're using to land with is still working properly, or maybe it runs out of fuel, or maybe it stops. If it's still working properly, then they'd hit the abort button, and then that engine would go full thrust, and it would take them up as far as it could till it ran out of fuel. Then it would drop off the stage, and they'd use the other engine on the ascent stage. But if for some reason, say that that engine conks out, then they would hit the abort stage button, which would automatically cut off the descent stage and let it drop to the lunar surface and fire up the ascent engine. So anyway, these are two critical buttons. But what they found was that the computer was getting these weird signals from somewhere to abort. And they couldn't figure out what was going on for a while. But then when they asked the astronauts to tap the panel, it went away. And so they figured out that it must be a piece of solder behind the panel that's floating around, that's shorting out the abort system. And this was bad, because if they're coming down and trying to land and the abort signal comes on because of this little piece of solder, then the landing's over with. So they had essentially 2 hours to fix this before they were to land. This fellow's name is Don Isles, and he worked for MIT at the time, and he was one of the programmers of the lunar module software. And that's what he looks like today, and that's what he looked like back in 1971. And essentially, he had 2 hours to go in and fix this this problem. And so I'm going to play a little bit of the landing here, and you'll hear, or at least you'll hear some calm communication from the astronauts. You know, when they hear the word that the computer's been fixed. And essentially, what they did is he hacked the program and sent up some instructions for them to manually type into the computer, which changed the program. By the way, Don has written a book, which when I bought, I could not put down. So if you're into programming and whatever, this is all his experiences on programming for the Apollo program.
Later that day, Shepard and Mitchell climbed into the lunar module and carried, and undocked prior to descent.
And we're free.
Yeah, okay. As they checked out the lunar module, problems appeared. An erroneous report was being signaled onboard Antares and in mission control. Should this occur during the landing burn, Antares would abort automatically, and the landing would be off. The mission control team had 2 hours, the time of one lunar orbit, to find a solution. Flight controller Dick Thorson diagnosed the problem as a loose particle in the abort button. The burden then came to rest on the shoulders of computer programmer Donald Isles. Working against time at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he reprogrammed the lunar module computer to ignore the false signal. This new program is then checked out in a simulator at Cape Kennedy. As Antares came into contact with Earth again, the instructions were sent up to the crew.
Okay, thanks to the computer. Okay, you did a nice job down there. We're beautiful.
Less than 10 miles above the lunar surface, Shepard and Mitchell swept across the landing site.
And Houston, you're built for Fra Mauro. It's a beautiful day in all of Fra Mauro.
Then, another problem. The landing radar, which was showing their altitude above the lunar surface.
Road radar. Road radar. Okay, Houston, I'd like you to cycle the landing radar record. Okay, Michael. Okay, I got the acceptor radar. This is great. Great. Okay, monitor the fuel. Oh, you be careful. 10 seconds to go. Okay, let's take over.
Going failed. A major objective of this mission to Fra Mauro. A hole blasted in the moon's surface eons ago. It would provide a scientific clue to the history of the moon, of the Earth, and the solar system. We think that the Fra Mauro area was full of material thrown out by the impact that created the Indian basin of the North. If this was the case, we could get samples torn out from the deeper 60 miles below the crust. More in all, Fra Mauro material could contain a great deal of new information about the early history of the moon, and thus help us to better understand the formation of our lunar surface.
Okay, so the computer problem was, I mentioned three problems that could have prevented the landing. First was the docking, second was the computer, and the third, you might have heard, the problem with the radar. The radar is on the bottom of the descent stage, and it essentially feeds information to the computer on the altitude and the descent rate and also the horizontal rate. And there it is on the Apollo 11 lunar module, and it's right in there. And there's actually a shield that they put up so that all of the stuff coming out of the engine didn't affect the signals that it used. So as the lunar module comes in, it's actually in different positions depending on the angle of the lunar module to the surface of the moon, but also the height. And what happens is at a certain point in time, the radar looks for, once they get low enough, it looks for a signal from the ground. And when that signal is received, mission control looks at it and decides whether it's accurate. And then they tell the astronauts to accept the radar, which essentially is they hit a button on the computer, and then the radar information is fed to the computer. It wasn't coming in, and there was a mission rule that if they got to a certain altitude without the radar working, they call off the landing. They'd abort and go back up into orbit. So that's why, you hear Mitchell going, "Come on, radar! Come on, radar!" And in typical IT fashion, they turned off the radar and turned it on again. Afterwards, they determined that it had moved from one position to the other for some reason. And so it wasn't in the correct orientation for picking up the data from 10,000 feet. By resetting it, fixed the problem. So that was the other major problem that could have prevented the landing. There have always been stories about whether Shepard would have just said, forget the radar, I'm going to go down manually. But it's just an impossible task. The radar feeds information to the computer program, and that controls the thrust and everything. It just wouldn't have happened.
It looks like you're about on the bottom step. And on the surface. That's it for the old man. Okay, you're right. Challenge on the surface. It's been a long way. We're here. I can see the reason we haven't killed it because we landed on the slope. The landing gear struts appear to be about evenly depressed. Roger out. And moving around, getting familiar with the surface. Surface in which the forward foot pad landed is extremely soft. Matter of fact, it's in a small depression. The soil is so soft that it comes up all the way to the top of the foot pad. And even folded over the side to some degree. The same is true of the flying truck.
So here's Shepard taking his first walks on the surface. The landing was at about 4:30 in the morning, and they were out about by the time I got to school, and they got right to it. First thing they did was set up the flag, and you can already see his nice white suit is getting pretty dirty from that dirty surface. Next is some 16mm footage that they obtained with the movie camera on the Met. You see Mitchell coming down the ladder. He actually had to go back in and flip a switch on the lunar module because they set up this special S-band antenna that you can see the shadow on the side there. You'll see pictures of it later on. The idea was to get a better TV picture. This is the second time they had a color camera on the moon. Apollo 11 had black and white. Apollo 12 had a color camera, but one of the astronauts inadvertently pointed it too long at the sun, and burn it out. So they definitely didn't want to have any problems with this TV camera. Unfortunately, it overheated, and that's why when you'll see some of this video, you'll see that the white surface of the astronaut suits just tended to bloom a little bit. So not the greatest picture. So here's Mitchell coming down the ladder, and they tended to have these 16mm at different frame rates. So sometimes it looks like the astronauts are moving quickly, or sometimes it looks like they're moving kind of slow. And there's Fred Hayes, who Apollo 13 astronaut. He was actually a capsule communicator with a smile on his face, although he knew that should have been him on Fra Mauro. There you can see at the very bottom of the picture there, you can see that 1 foot pad and all the lunar regolith, the soil that it's pushed up. It's a very very dusty landing site. There's another view of the LEM from the other side, and a view of the LEM looking east. And there you can see that S-band antenna on the left, and that hill on behind the lunar module on the left there. That's the slope going up to Cone Crater. One thing that was interesting is as they were removing the experiment packages from the back of the LEM, they used these tapes to lower them to the surface, and you'll see in this video that one of them creates a bit of a pendulum. And you know, I sort of did a little looking and saw that someone had actually posted something online about the lunar pendulum, and you'll see the rate of the pendulum is rather slow. It's about 5 seconds per, I don't know what you call a full cycle, 4 hertz, I guess, frequency. So definitely slower than a pendulum on Earth. And that allows you to calculate the gravity of the moon. And maybe that's a way to prove that they were really on the moon. Anyway, that's kind of neat. So they set up this ALSEP experiment, which was totally self-contained with a seismometer and other experiments to essentially learn about the lunar environment.
Yes, Bruce. Negative, Ed. I believe you're off to our left. Okay, you're coming in now. Until we get up pretty close to the site. Now. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop here and rest for a minute. I'll let go take care of your expected. Okay, Ed, we've got you in the field of view over to the left now. Okay. Al should be coming in right now, too. There might be a little secondary impact right here, but there are so many different types of craters around here. We could spend the whole EVA within 100 yards of the limb. Okay, lead on. I'll follow what's the best place. Okay, going to your right. Okay, and soon we're proceeding over a very fine grain regolith. This is spot 4. Undulating surface. Okay, you need to angle left just a little bit. Okay, yeah, you're doing fine now. The use of this looks like brown telephone powder is fine in both places. Roger, the Mets going off to the right. It's increasing now. Mets trying to find a smooth place to go.
I think let's go around this crater here. To the left, I think we can find our way down.
Yeah, so because they didn't have any remote control on the camera, they wanted the astronauts to stay in the field of view, but of course they were, anyway, they got a little, astronauts got a little testy after a while, like, leave me alone. It's interesting, the lunar surface, how Mitchell said it was like brown talcum powder. And I've always liked this photograph. It shows the tracks of the Met and how it compacted the soil in a way that is very, very reflective, but also it gives a real sense of the undulating surface. Also, we'll find that it's kind of interesting. The astronauts, when they came back, they said, well, you know, when I wanted, in the lighter gravity, when you bend over and pick something up and sort of kneel and pick something up, gravity helps you do that. But on the moon, they actually found it difficult to kneel down and pick things up because there wasn't as much gravity. And the Met was designed, I think, to work in an Earth gravity environment. But when it got on the moon, it was very tippy. And the astronauts really quickly realized that they were going to have problems with it if they got any kind of speed. It would be bouncing around just because of the lower lunar gravity. So here are pictures of the ALSEP. And again, there's the seismometer. They were supposed to keep dirt off of the experiments, and in that kind of gravity and all that dirt, there was just no way. The power supply was this plutonium source, this RTG, same kind of source that they used on spacecraft like Voyager or Cassini or Galileo or New Horizons, just because they wanted to power this during nights. The solar panels just wouldn't work. They needed to supply current to these experiments so they wouldn't get too cold during the lunar night. Mitchell had an interesting experiment called the thumper. Essentially, it was like a long cane, but at the bottom, it had these little explosives that he would trigger at various distances from the seismometer, and the seismometer picked them up. And that was kind of a neat experiment. This is one of 3 laser retro reflectors that they put on the moon. One was on Apollo 11, the other Apollo 15. And this is what they used to send lasers from Earth through big telescopes and then receive the signal back. And with accurately timing those signals, they were able to determine the distance to the moon within, I think, 3 or 4 inches. And they learned a lot about the moon by studying its changing distance. This is what they call a locator shot for the reflector. Not a great picture, but I wanted to show it to you because it begins to show the problems with determining distance on the moon. On the Earth, if something's far away, it's not as clear the farther away it gets. On the moon, that doesn't happen. So there you see the lunar module, which is about 100 meters or so away, but it's kind of difficult to tell how far away it really is. Like, because as long as you know its size, then you have a pretty good idea. But that's the problem that Shepard and Mitchell had, was navigating on the moon and being able to figure out how far away things were. This is a frame from the 16 millimeters showing Shepard, and you see on his left arm there his watch and his checklist that he used for the moonwalk. There's Mitchell walking away from the ALSEP, and then they're heading back to the lunar module to close out the first EVA. The second EVA, they'd be walking up to Cone Crater and stopping at various places to pick up samples. But it was about as you can see the scale in the bottom, it's about 1 kilometer up there and 1 kilometer back. And there was some concern as to whether they'd be able to get there or not, and how physically difficult it would be. So there's a picture of Cone Crater from that movie as they flew in. And you can see it's kind of difficult to tell how steep some of that surface is, but they were essentially going to come up that flank and go right to the crater.
Roger, Commander's orders. Okay, we'll go to pick up the LPM, and then we'll pull the television camera after that. Okay, we're right about on the timeline. Cable's the curve. Got it? Okay. That's the cable. We'll go around the S-band. Yeah, really, let's meet there. Very good. Just really look neat there. I can see it bouncing a little bit there. And your tracks are quite visible. They're about to float. Okay. Okay, you're looking at Colin. Roger, now we have a little bit of a glare across the center, but in the background we can see the crest of cone. Okay. It will probably be off the camera to the right. Check our position right about here. I'll see if we can find out where we are.
So we didn't get to follow with them. The camera stayed where it was. But here's another great picture showing the effect of the met tracks on the ground. It's just an interesting surface. So the astronauts had maps, but I really don't think they helped that much. They knew they had to climb up the hill, but they really didn't know how far they had to climb. And they could look back in the distance. You can see on the right-hand side there the lunar module as they walked away. They had to stop and perform geology. They dug trenches and took samples and grabbed rocks, and they used this what's called a gnomon for a scale for taking pictures of rocks and then picking them up. But as they got higher and higher on the slope, their heartbeats increased, and they weren't really sure where they were. Here's Shepard with a core tube, which was used to hammer a hollow tube that you hammer into the ground and then pull it out and separate it. And that gives you a cross guide of the varying soils down as far as that is, maybe a couple of feet. And then they began to get into a blocky area. So they knew they were getting closer to cone. But the problem was the Met. They ended up carrying the two of them. The whole idea of bringing the Met was to prevent, to help them. But in fact, they even discussed getting rid of it because it was just more of a pain than anything. So you can see it's very blocky there. They had stopped, put their hammer down, and took some samples. But they didn't make it to the edge of cone. They were given an extension to their moonwalk, and still they didn't reach the rim of cone. And here you can see in a lunar reconnaissance orbiter picture the dark line at the bottom. That's their path, and you can see that in this on the southern end of this boulder field they stopped, and that's where they turned around. And just above this boulder field, you can see these boulders here. I kind of think that that's these boulders here. And so they weren't that far away from the cone of the rim of Cone Crater. But again, looking in that direction, there's nothing really, to the right, the hill was going higher. And they felt that the cone was at the very top of the hill. But in fact, they nearly walked right by it. So Houston said, look, sample where you are. We're going to consider that you're on the rim of cone and then come back. So there's a lunar reconnaissance orbiter picture of the landing site. You can see the LEM site there. You can see the work at the LSEP, and then you can see their path going out to cone and their path coming back. All in all, on the third EVA, they traveled about 3 kilometers. This amazing what you can see from lunar orbit, the descent stage of the lunar module, the path to the Allset, and then here's the thumper path that Mitchell made with just by the footsteps, changed the albedo of the surface enough to be seen from lunar orbit. Now going back to this picture here, I spent a little bit of time looking at it and then looking at this as a map and trying to identify craters in this picture, on this picture. And I think the only one I can figure out is that this one, maybe that one. But otherwise, you know, it's just nearly impossible. It's just, and it gives you an idea how difficult it would be to navigate on the moon. So their 2 EVAs came to the end at the very end of the second EVA. Shepard, an avid golfer, pulled out a 6-iron head that fit one of their sampling tools. And he hit a couple golf balls, and you can actually see a couple of them in this picture, one there, and I think one of them is over here somewhere. Didn't go very far, but and it's difficult to use a golf club on the moon because of the stiffness of the suit. He had to do a one-hand shot.
Kilo has never been used. Is that correct? Right. You're looking at, you might recognize what I have in my hand is the handle for the contingency sample return. I just so happens to have a 6-iron on the bottom of it. If I'm left in, I have a little white pellet that's made of millions in America. And I drop it down. Unfortunately, as soon as the step, I can't do it with 2 hands, but I'm going to try an old sand trap shot here. They got more dirt than ball. More dirt than ball. Here we go again. It looks like a slice to me out. There we go. 3 at a time. One more. Miles and miles and miles. Very good now. And to answer that question earlier, that kilo was used for the window shot there, so you ought to bring it back.
So it was time to leave. This is a frame from a 16mm camera that they had looking out the window of the LEM. You can see the flag there. You can see the shadow of the Met. Also, you can see the 2 backpacks that they, once they got up into the LEM, they unloaded all their equipment, whatever, took off their backpacks, connected their spacesuits to the lunar module oxygen supply, and then opened the door and essentially tossed all their trash out to compensate for the weight of the rocks that they were bringing back. So here is the liftoff from the moon from that film and the rendezvous.
Again, it's the time. Time to head back to the lunar module. After a quick side trip to check on the science station, they loaded the lunar module with samples and data and stepped off the lunar surface. The second expedition had lasted 4 hours and 35 minutes. A total exploration of a record 9.5 hours. 33.5 hours after they landed, Alan, Shepard, and Mitchell lifted off in the silent baptism of the moon.
Captain Richard, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
believe 360 of us.
So, 3 days back and a successful splashdown, and the trip ended. They spent a couple of weeks in isolation quarantine. They were the last astronauts to do that. And here they are looking at rocks at the Lunar Receiving Lab in Houston. And they brought back the biggest grab sample, that rock there. They called it Big Bertha. And what's interesting is Big Bertha was in the news a couple of years ago. And the fact that the geologists discovered part of Big Bertha actually had come from the Earth. And so if you want to read more about that, the stories are online, but it's interesting that we've found pieces of the moon, meteorites from the moon on the Earth, and through this sample, still working on these samples 50 years later, finding a sample from the Earth. Now, I was really into this mission after seeing the spacecraft on the pad. I watched every minute I could, got up at 4 in the morning to watch the landing, had to go to school on the Friday during the first EVA. And I will admit that I sat, our classroom was right beside the library, and they had the TV on in the library. I could hear the whole EVA, but I couldn't see it, and that traumatized me for quite a while. But I did make a scrapbook, and I wish we were together so I could show you my scrapbook, but it documents the entire flight. By around 1980, I caught wind of this fellow that had a VHS copy of all of the lunar video. And I got in touch with him and got a copy of it. And this is essentially NASA's archive copy of all the video that was captured on what's called kinescope, which is using film and actually filming the actual video. And so after waiting for so long, I actually got to see the EVA and the second EVA at Combe Crater. And it's essentially just listening to the astronauts talk, because the video is just pointed at that same field. And then in the 90s, DVD collections began to appear. And so anyone who wanted them can get access to all of the video from these missions. And now a lot of this is on YouTube. The only thing that came back from Apollo 14 is Kitty Hawk, and it is on display at the Kennedy Space Center. The Apollo 14 astronauts are all gone now. Russo died early of pancreatitis in 1994. So yeah, he was only in his early 60s. And Shepard had a bad time of dealing with cancer for several years before he died. I had a chance to see Ed Mitchell again in 2012, and he passed away in 2016. So Apollo 14 was successful. So now upcoming were 3 missions of 3 days each on the moon. They'll have their own electric car. And on the front of the car is a color TV camera, which can be controlled from Earth. And the technology of TV improved vastly on Apollo 15. And there is a frame from Apollo 15's video. And with that, I will thank you very much for listening to me reminisce about Apollo 14. And I would be glad to take questions. Alan, do you want to go through the chat and find some interesting questions? Or I see there are quite a few there.
Yeah, there was certainly one very early on regarding escape velocity and how they got off the moon. You can describe that. I think the individual involved wasn't clear that that they used a rocket, but if you can describe that process. What is the escape velocity on the moon and how they left the moon surface without a rocket?
That number doesn't come to.
It was reported as 2.3 kilometers per second versus Earth at 11.2. Thank you,
Which makes
Ron.
sense. 1/6 of the moon's escape velocity. And yes, on the ascent stage that you saw approaching the command module there is an engine and in fact, when I was in that LEM, I was sitting on the top of the engine on that LEM. It sort of sticks right out into the living area there. And but because of the less gravity, they don't need as much thrust, and it's a very straightforward of getting up off the moon and into orbit. But of course, the big trick was there was only one engine that had to work perfectly. Otherwise, yeah, I guess you stayed on the moon.
Chris has one. Would conspiracy theorists use the earthly origin of Big Bertha to claim that the moon landing was fake?
I'm not sure if they would. It's just a small, from what I read in the article, it's not the entire rock. It's just a very small piece inside the rock. So it was just interesting that the chemical makeup of that little clast was very un-moon-like and very Earth-like. It was essentially what I read. So, well, conspiracy theorists will always find ways to support their theory. I mean, that pendulum was obviously mechanized, right? So, yeah.
Thanks, Randy.
If you do have a question, just unmute yourselves, people.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah. Hi, Peter.
Yep.
Hi, Randy. On the video that you showed as the lunar module approaches the CSM coming up from the surface of the moon, showed the CSM turning.
Yeah.
Did they do that just to inspect? And did they do that by turning the CSM, or did the lunar module make a trip around?
They did it for some reason to inspect, and that was a 360 that the command service module did.
Thank you.
And then I don't remember exactly why they did that, but it seemed to be in the flight plan, because Shepard says, okay, we're at 75 feet and we're waiting for to watch the command service module do its rotation. So.
Rob has a question. How long would they be in orbit before they begin TLI, the translunar injection?
Generally, it was about an orbit and a half, so just around 2 hours after launch. The interesting thing, though, with the docking problem is the third stage had its own system to control its stability, but it was on batteries, and they were up against those batteries running out. So it wasn't like they could spend a day trying to figure out that problem. They only had, I think, 2 or 3 hours.
Kirby is demanding that you do similar talks for Apollo 15, 16, and 17.
Okay, well, the last thing I want to do is upset Kirby. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Randy, demand might be a strong word, but I know that you've done a series of these now. I think you did the earlier Apollo missions as well for our club. If you have it in you to do the remaining ones, that'd be great. They're awesome.
Yeah, I probably will. So any feedback on this one, I'd be glad to hear it. I know it went a little long. The problem is I added the video and I didn't know how long it was going to be to do the whole thing. So I might cut back. Apollo 15 didn't have the kind of problems that Apollo 14 had. So they had one problem that they fixed pretty quickly. So hi, Beulah.
Yeah, I have a question. The interview with Mitchell.
Yeah.
What was that? Was that you, or you just?
Yeah. Well, that was my younger cousin.
Okay. No,
it was Randy,
you, right?
Yes.
Right?
Oh my goodness! I was so impressed. I'm so impressed. I'm very impressed.
It was like 37 years ago. So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. He was interesting. He was actually you know how they get these guys that come around and rent out the convention center for inspirational talks. he was linked with one of those guys. And so I just went before they started and grabbed him and said, "Can I do a 5-minute interview?" And then we get out. So.
Wow.
He knew you were going to
So
do
you
that.
already.
Sorry?
He knew you were going to do that, Randy.
Yes, of course.
Because of ESP.
Well, he didn't tell Shepard that he was going to do that. And Shepard had a bit of a temper. And Shepard found out in a newspaper article after they got back that he confronted Mitchell. I think that's the story. Chris might need to correct me if I'm wrong, but Shepard definitely didn't know he was doing it. ESP experiments on the way home. So, is that where you remember, Chris?
Yeah, actually, the ESP experiment didn't work out because he had worked out the precise time with somebody back on Earth, and then when the launch was postponed for 40 minutes because of that crappy weather, that day, everything went out of kilter 40 minutes. So he was looking. I think he was operating on ground elapsed time, and the guy on Earth was not. So, he was there. He had a special set of cards.
CSB cards.
That's right.
But wouldn't the guy on Earth have known that because of ESP?
Exactly. That's part of the ESP experiment.
Yeah. Eric Briggs has a question. Would you say everyone was satisfied with results of Apollo 14? Just for one reason or another, I feel it was less successful than 12 or 15. Maybe it's just a matter of the telepathy experiment.
Well, yeah, the ESP was not part of the NASA flight plan. I think it was. It's interesting. The different crews took more interest in geology than others. Like the Apollo 15 crew, they were really into geology. The Apollo 14 crew, not so much. And so their sample collection wasn't as impressive as other missions. But, what NASA really needed was a successful mission after Apollo 13. And that's what they got with Apollo 14. Not making it to the rim of Cone Crater told them a lot about navigating on the moon. Fortunately, the lunar rover, the car, had a navigation system based on signals from the LEM. And so they had no problem getting, kilometers away from the LEM and getting to the various places they wanted to go. But no, it's a real problem. They just did not know where the heck they were. And they essentially, to get back to the LEM, they could always see the LEM down there in the valley. So they just, it was easy to get back to the LEM because they could see it all the time.
Nice. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just have a comment that.
Yeah.
Yes. I just have a comment that I've been to the Smithsonian twice, but having this kind of study of individual landings and so on, like so many years later, now it's embellishing what I've seen then. Yeah, so I'm very happy about that, very satisfied that I saw initially at Smithsonian displays, but with not too much of a connection, history or background. But the lectures you're giving on an ongoing basis, it's really great, enriching all that. Thank you.
You're welcome. And the six iron is at the Air and Space Museum.
What was that?
The 6 iron, the golf club, is at the Air and Space Museum.
Right, I see.
Hey, Randy, Swapna here.
Yeah.
So great presentation. Thank you. Great videos, great pictures. Question for you. How did you manage to get your hands on some unique videos and pictures? Very interested to know that. Your collection's absolutely amazing.
I guess just years of collecting stuff. I was fortunate enough to get a copy of the video. And a lot of it is, all the video I showed is probably online somewhere. And a lot of the pictures are just off the internet. again, I shared some personal experiences along the way there. So I guess some of them are unique. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for hanging in there. So our next meeting is in a couple weeks on February 12th. That's our potpourri meeting. So if you have any presentations that you would like to give, please let me know. There is an email address that you can send it to. Just go to our website and on the contact page. I think it's member meetings or mem meetings or something like that. So we always like to get short presentations from many members on astrophotography, or I don't know how many people are out shooting the sky at 30 below or whatever, but maybe you can pull out some pictures from a visit to the Kennedy Space Center or to another facility that you'd like to share. And even if it's just a 10-minute presentation, it's a nice variety, and I think everyone just likes to sort of check in with everybody and see what everyone's up to. So that's on the 12th. Our AGM is on the 26th. So that's our business meeting. Probably find a small, not a small speaker, a speaker to give a short talk that night. But we do need everyone to come back so that we have a quorum for our business meeting. And this is, for those of you who haven't been to one, it's an evening of essentially reports on activities of the center over the past calendar year. And of course, it'll be quite unique this year with everyone being hunkered down and essentially being online. But we do need to hold that meeting, and that'll be on the 26th of February. That's all I have. Does anyone have any announcements or comments or questions before we sign off? Any councilor members have anything to add to that? Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks everybody. Take care, stay warm, stay safe, and we'll see you on the 12th. And please, if you've got a presentation that you'd like to make, please let me know so we can fill up the program. Take care, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Randy.
Awesome.
Great.
Awesome.
Great talk.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy.
Welcome.
It was great.
Thanks, Randy.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. Bye. Thanks.
Oh, good trip.
See you guys next meeting.
Yeah, see ya. Take care.